Day 2 for the defense in the Conrad Murray trial leads to more setbacks. A nurse practitioner called as a defense witness, but it's what she said during cross-examination that helped the prosecution score points. And attorney R.J. Manuelian is here. He'll join our Susan Hirasuna in studio to talk about the latest developments in this case.
Well, also on the stand today, the toxicologist that tested the stomach contents of Michael Jackson. So here's my admission. I got lost. I'm transcribing the trial. I'm trying to understand all these numbers, blood levels, etc., lorazepam. Well, so if I got lost, I can only wonder how the jury handled that testimony.
Yeah, that's always the challenge. Here to talk more about today is legal analyst R.J. Manuelian. This is interesting when a defense witness turns into a prosecution witness and the defense is trying to save it, and it clearly didn't work.
Yeah. See, it was a double-edged sword. Sherilyn Lee did some good things for the defense and some great things for the prosecution, specifically when David Walgren asked her, you know, would you do this for $150,000? She said she wouldn't do it, and she mentioned the fact that she talked to Michael Jackson about the possibility of not waking up. What happens if you don't wake up, Michael?
Yeah.
So that really went to the hearts of the jury, I think, and it didn't really hurt the defense. But remember, the defense doesn't have a lot to work with. It's not really the greatest case to defend, so they've got to use what they have, and it's not much.
It seems so emotional when she said, you know, anybody who cares about you wouldn't be using this drug, propofol, at home. I'm wondering, the emotion of it all, is that what maybe stands out to the jurors today?
What you mean, what they took away the most?
Yeah, I've done a lot of trials, and I've had the fortunate opportunity to interview them, and I could assure you that the jurors are going to remember Sherilyn Lee's testimony, especially because she seemed very human. She seemed emotional. She seemed like she really cared for Michael Jackson. It pulled on her heartstrings when you listened to her testimony. And that break, that 20-minute break, because she was so emotional, because she couldn't testify, you just saw that she was genuine.
But Susan,
and she was in the, you know, in the courtroom with all those Jackson family members as well. So she's up against that too. She's looking out.
But the judge wouldn't let her say too much about how much she cared about Michael when she said she needed a break.
And given that emotional state, Tom Mesereau said one of the real dangers, and you talk about a double-edged sword, the real fine line that they're working here, this kind of tightrope that they're walking, is that how do they paint Michael Jackson? What kind of character assassination can they do to help their case, and what can they do that would just absolutely blow them away?
That's a very good point.
They're trying to show that Michael Jackson has known about Diprovan for many years. They're trying to show that through other doctors and the doctor shopping that he did, this is what he wanted. It was almost like a drug addict going out there and looking for a drug dealer. But the problem is, in this case, the drug dealers, the doctors, and you saw a pattern of doctors say for no amount of money they would never do something like this. So although the defense needs to draw the fact that Michael Jackson is an addict looking for his, Diprovan, they also need to show that Michael Jackson is primarily at fault for selecting Dr. Conrad Murray. But remember something, that might hurt the defense in the long run. So it's a tightrope that they're walking.
It seems as if, though, that they were trying to show that if nurse practitioner Sherilyn Lee's not going to give it to Michael Jackson, he'll just keep looking for the guy who finally will, and that was Conrad Murray. So I think the defense is trying to paint this situation. He was in this impossible situation. And what didn't get into the trial was, of course, Conrad Murray's financial situation. He was desperate too, as was Michael Jackson, as was AEG Live. I mean, there was like a $40 million cost pre-production before they went to London. So everybody was sort of on the hook for a lot of money.
But RJ, when you have these witnesses who you think are going to give you some mixed testimony and you're the defense, do you not call them?
You have to call them, but you have to be very careful. And what you ask and not open the door. And opening the door means if you ask something that could hurt you, then the prosecution could use that against you. It's like opening up Pandora's box. But again,
did they do that?
It becomes evidence, doesn't it?
It does become evidence, and they also hear, you know, all these objections that you hear, and the sustaining, even though they're not supposed to consider that, they see that. So that's also a double-edged sword. From my perspective, Chernoff being objected to nonstop could be seen as the judge writing him or not giving him the opportunity to defend him. But you do the best with what you can going back to the witnesses.
What about the situation where we saw it in my package where they're trying to go someplace and they can't quite get there and they finally give up because of, you know, all the objections. What does that do to the jury?
Like I said, it depends on the jurors. Some jurors might see it as poor, Chernoff. He's not getting his questions and they're not being fair to Murray. He's a sympathetic defendant, so maybe it seems like the judge is a little bit more biased, pro-prosecution. But, you know, on the flip side, they could be getting upset.
You know, I have to admit to you, I actually went back to listen to the toxicologist's testimony because I was so bothered that I didn't quite understand. And I think what I understand now is that Flanagan was trying to get someplace. He was trying to get to the point that in the stomach contents, as they mentioned in opening statements, he had 8 lorazepam pills, or the equivalent of 8 lorazepam. He couldn't get there. And there was all these objections from the prosecution, and ultimately the prosecution crossed, but they also just sort of discounted it. And it didn't go anywhere.
All right, so let's talk about the legal teams. You have the prosecution, taxpayer money, lots of lawyers, lots of expert witnesses, lots of money behind them. The defense, Conrad Murray's in a little bit of financial trouble. Are his lawyers really working on a shoestring? Are they in trouble because of the finances of this? They don't have quite the team the prosecution does.
Well, remember, he didn't get paid from the contract through AEG or Michael Jackson, so he hasn't got paid the $150,000 per month. He had none of that. He has other financial problems, reportedly. And, yeah, they're working on a shoestring budget. So they don't have the same dream team that OJ did, but it doesn't mean that Chernoff and Flanagan aren't going to do the same zealous representation that Johnny Cochran did for OJ. But it's a different dynamic.
But Flanagan is well respected.
Very well respected, and he has experience in propofol and has actually had acquittals on propofol cases.
But they both look overworked. I mean, they seem overwhelmed in court.
Well, because they have a shoestring budget, they don't have 8 other attorneys working for them. They're hands-on, which is the way it should be in
Flanagan's
actuality.
frustrated because, as you pointed out, he has a line of questioning that he wants to establish. He wants to talk to the toxicologist or what have you, and he can't do it. So as soon as there's that objection, he turns to page 2 to find another line of questioning.
And I can't tell you how frustrating that is. It happens to criminal defense attorneys all the time, where you have 13, 14 questions, and you get to question 3, and it's still objected to, and then the judge says move on, and then you just gotta move on.
All right, Hal's team gave us their rating. We've got some D's and some C's. They're not so good. Your ratings for the defense team so far?
I don't know if I should grade.
You know what?
I don't know if I have the credentials.
You know what? I'm not going to grade them because I don't think it's fair to grade somebody when the test isn't done. It's not completed yet. They still have to finish.
Day 2.
It's only day 2, and they haven't even put on Paul White, which I was hoping they put on first. But I think we should wait and reserve our opinion until Paul White testifies.
Why wouldn't they put him on first, right after?
Because they're probably going to forget everything after Paul White testifies.
Was that a scheduling thing?
No, I think it's because they're going to forget everything and they're saving the best for last.
And the little piecemeal defense strategy that everything will be tied together, does that strain the jury?
No, because they're supposed to keep an open mind. They're supposed to wait. And I bet you they're very anxious to hear from Paul White because we've been hearing so much about him for the past 2 weeks.
You know what I think is interesting is in the court proceedings today, the jury was really on top of it. So there were a couple of times when the attorneys, would have to call back a piece of evidence and they didn't know what the evidence number was, and the jury knew. So they wanted to call back the Kenny Ortega email, and both the prosecution and the defense team trying to figure out, well, what exhibit number is it?
And that happened yesterday
People's
too,
One.
right?
They knew it was People's One.
Yeah.
And they also knew what the next exhibit number was supposed to be. So Flanagan wanted to put in some test results, and he was like, I'm not sure where we are, and then the jury said SSS.
Well, Chernoff yesterday was pulling out different pieces of equipment.
Out of the little evidence bags.
Right, and the jurors kind of knew which was which. So jury's on. That's
They're
a good
on
sign,
it.
right?
Yeah, they're on
That's
it. That
a good
means they're
sign.
awake.
There's tons of evidence too. How could they possibly remember everything? There's triple J, triple K, and the prosecution's entered 100 pieces of evidence. It's not that easy to follow.
So let's go back to
more than 200 pieces.
So let's go back to the business of this show and the pressure that Michael Jackson was on. He wasn't getting any sleep. The pressure that AEG was on to make sure that this show actually went on. And what the president of AEG of the entertainment division said about Michael Jackson, he said that he was overwhelmed by the performance, so he felt comfortable with what was going on. How does that play to the jury?
Well, that's what the defense is trying to show through the contract, the amount of pressure that Michael Jackson had. Michael Jackson needed to sleep for this concert. If he didn't sleep, he couldn't perform. He had 50 performances to do. And he's told Dr. Murray on the date of this incident, I need to sleep, otherwise I can't do practice. There's a lot of pressure. So the problem with Michael Jackson is he does a performance, he's energized, he can't fall back asleep. And if he doesn't fall back asleep, he can't do the performance the next day. It's a domino effect. So there was a lot of pressure for Michael to sleep. That's why it was so important for him to get the propofol, because he knew that was the only thing that could do it for him.
You know what made me gasp is Randy Phillips mentioned that the whole production was supposed to be packed up and shipped over to London June 25th.
Right. Coming up, our trial coverage continues.